Hello, everybody. Hello from the Center for Heritage Management of Ahmedabad University. We're very happy today. I would use the term even honored. We're very happy today and honored to have three of our distinguished graduates here with us today. And I would ask them to share their experiences from their field research in heritage management, and particularly from their master thesis. Today is the first of this series of webinars dedicated to the field experiences of our graduates. And we will talk to our graduates about their interactions with different community groups and how these interactions and their field research in general help them not only in their research conclusions, but also on a larger scale in their professional life. This webinar today, we will focus on Ahmedabad city, UNESCO World Heritage City of Ahmedabad. And we have three, not simply professionals, but members of the local community of Ahmedabad, who will share their experiences from their research in the city. They will share their experiences from the research on built heritage in the old city, as well as in the modern context. So, thank you, Niyati, Bajpai, for being with us today, Vasudha Saraogi, and Harsh Shah, for being with us today. So I would first of all like to ask you, how did you choose this research topic? How did you get this idea to come up with the specific research topic on the city of Ahmedabad and the community that you dealt with? Niyati? Just to let you know, Niyati is currently working for Elixir Foundation that is based here in the city of Ahmedabad. So Niyati, what was your research topic and how did you choose the specific research topic?
Thank you for having me here, and good evening to everyone. My research topic was rehabilitation process in an urban historic city and social values depicting the community participation. That's my research topic. I did my bachelor's in interior design, and in that also we have a dissertation. That dissertation was on rehabilitation of a heritage structure into a boutique hotel. So this topic was not new to me. I have already done a sort of design thesis on the same topic, but I wanted to inquire, like at that time I was a designer, but during this master's course I was in a perspective as a heritage professional. So I wanted to inquire about the same topic as a professional, as a heritage professional. So that's how I got, like I thought of inquiring more on this topic, not just from a designer's perspective. Another thing which inspired me was a little incident I would like to share with everyone, that happened before I joined CHM. So that was like with me throughout the journey. So once in an introductory session at CHM, we were, invited for a heritage walk in the old city. And at that time, we like started the walk. So I had to park my vehicle in front of a house because in the old city there is no as such a proper parking space. So I just parked in front of a house, and while I was leaving, the lady of the house, she called me and she shouted on me like, why are you parking in front of my house? So I requested her that, I was already late, so I just requested her that please allow me, it's only for 2 hours. So she told me that it's 2 hours for you, but it's every day for us. So that statement was like, it hit me, and I was like, true, it's only 2 hours for us because we won't be coming here back soon, but they have to face. It was a very small issue, but that just triggered something in me. So while I was just like thinking of what should I inquire and what should, because I have lived in the city, I also lived in the old city of Ahmedabad, and I was born and brought up in Ahmedabad. So Ahmedabad city was very close to me, close to my heart and all. So that was another point where I selected, the my city itself for inquiring, for research. So these were the few incidences that like gave me the research path I chose. Thank you.
That was a very good point, because yes, I mean, your 2 hours was every day for them. So it's very difficult for them to balance their requirements of living on leading their everyday life in the city, and at the same time having all these locals or even tourists, passing by, taking photos, etc. So that was a very interesting point. Vasudha, Vasudha, you're working for a family business on jewelry and also on fashion, and also you're a consultant on the newly established Heritage and Business unit of the Center for Heritage Management, running projects on different parts of and expressions of heritage. How did you come? What was your research topic? It was also in Ahmedabad city, and how did you come with it? Your background is in economics, as far as we know. Please share your experience with us.
Thank you. So my research topic was on the regeneration of historic neighborhoods through market routes. And I've always had a passion for historic sites and structures. And coming from a business background, the first question that would always come into my mind is, what beyond conservation? We have a conversation around it, and we have the activity of conservation happening, but what after that? So if you're addressing the topics of sustainability, then how do we make these sites or places capable of generating some form of a revenue for themselves? Also, if the site, could it cater to someone beyond a tourist? I mean, because there is certain amount of attachment of a community, and if a community provides to a site, then it's also important for the site to be able to give back to the community. And it's with this experience, the previous work experience I had, and these questions in my mind, that I started delving into this area, and I realized that we probably had a lot of questions to answer regarding what would be the ideal financing models. If we had to look at making these structures revenue generating, then what are the different perspectives that we could adopt beyond just bed and breakfast models? It's important to understand the difference between commercialization and commodification. And that was a huge goal in my thesis, that I don't want to promote commodification, but it's important to blend heritage and commercialization if we really wanted to continue and we want to have the conversation around continuity.
So allow me to highlight one of the points that you said. Even internationally, heritage management professionals, when they talk about sustainable development, they tend to associate sustainable development to tourism development. What I really liked in your approach is that you focused on the community development, and tourism would be one part, possibly not even the most important part of this social and economic sustainable development. And of course, sustainable development is not only about, as you said, bed and breakfast, but it's a whole spectrum of factors that should be taken into account. Harsh, your background is in architecture, and you're now working as a principal architect in Auran Architects, but at the same time you are lecturing at Niyati School of Design and LJ School of Architecture. Same question to you. How did you come up with this specific research topic?
Thank you so much, first of all, for having me here today. And it's always wonderful to be here at CHM and sharing thoughts and experiences and discussing here at CHM. So my research topic was on oral history and public memory for mapping values in the modern built heritage. So being from the architectural background, the School of Architecture, Ahmedabad, had always been one of the fascinating idols for, I think, every architecture students throughout India. So yes, there was something very important to be mapped in the School of Architecture, because since we were students long back, we always used to talk about its architecture, its spatial planning, its space analysis, the design features, but we never went beyond. So while doing my thesis into heritage management, I was keen on going beyond the conventional boundaries of architectural mapping, where values was a very key topic which was being introduced. And for that, again, a new methodology was supposed to be introduced to map those values, and to go beyond the conventional architectural mapping, to include more facts and figures. So oral history was one method which I adopted to converge the values into the thesis format. And so often also during my postgraduate diploma, I had a little experience about the understanding of oral history mapping in the old city of Ahmedabad. So I used that experience for mapping the value system of the fascinating School of Architecture building designed by Balkrishna Doshi sir in 1960. And almost 5 to 6 decades now to the building, and the building is looked upon as a heritage now, and wanted to go beyond the architecture and the spatial understandings, and wanted to involve more and more details towards the research. So oral history and public memory was one aspect which I was looking for, and why public memories, why collective stories are important to the research. Such questions were being introduced in my research, which could strongly make more possibilities towards the conventional architectural structures and boundaries. So yeah.
And in fact, your answer to this question and the way you address this question would lead me to the second round of what is the connection of the local community with Ahmedabad, and in fact, how is this community connected with the city, and how in your research did you map this connection? And if there are some interesting, exciting, or unexpected moments of this connection, please share them with us. For example, what Harsh said, and I found it very interesting, is that, and it's very relevant, especially to the country of India, is how to move beyond conventional architecture towards value systems, how to move beyond material buildings towards mapping values, mapping oral history, mapping public memory. And so that was a very interesting approach. Vasudha, would you like to share your own experiences on this community connection, how your research tried to map this community connection with Ahmedabad?
So I think what was interesting is that I chose my microsite, which was also the area where I did my practicum during my master's course. And I went in with a very fixed perception that probably community may not want the development, or maybe they do not accept the commercialization. So I think the first thing I learned was that you cannot enter with a perception. Because when I went there and I started moving outward, so instead of having an inward movement towards my, the hotel that I picked up, I started moving outward. And as I went towards the community, I realized that they are open to progress and to development, and they look forward to alternate economic opportunities. So when I realized that the community was actually very responsive towards change, that is what gave direction to my thesis, where I realized that probably we could craft a model where the community was in synergy with professionals, as well as with the private sector, as well as with the government. That would be a scenario where I think everyone would be relatively in a good power balance. Because again, working with the community over there, I realized that the power balance in decision making was a major issue, because that's where the imbalance came, where the community felt that they were not remunerated enough, or the development was not in lines with their thought process. And another incident that happened was,
Sorry to interrupt, which means that moving beyond a top-down approach and based on a rhetoric, let's say, or how could I say, an imaginative approach towards development, tourism development, towards a more bottom-up living heritage approach about what the community would really like, and in this way to involve the community in this decision-making process. That sounds very interesting. And yeah.
and there was this point when we spoke to the community, and the community did mention that if there is some form of a development which leads to a better standard of living for us, and we get better infrastructure, then that provides them motivation to not move out of their ancestral area, to continue occupying it, as well as enjoy a given standard of life, which currently they were not able to because of degenerating infrastructure. So that was a very interesting turn in the conceptualization of the thesis for me.
That's very interesting. So again, moving beyond the material, the buildings towards the community needs and mapping the community needs. That's very interesting. Niyati? I will keep that only for myself so that I can interrupt.
No problem at all. So earlier I had this idea in my mind where I wanted to have a like a difference. I wanted to map the difference between a heritage property in an urban historic city and a heritage property in a rural settlement, right? How does the community there, respond to the rehabilitation process, and what are the responses in an urban historic city? But as we all know, the situation for the previous year was not suitable for traveling and all those things, and there were a lot of lockdowns and curfews and everything happening. So with that, I had to narrow down my research area to the Ahmedabad city, to an urban historic city center itself. But even in that, I tried to like pick two different cases for my thesis. One was where the community was like, so in both the cases, the community were happy that people are recognizing the city as a World Heritage City, and because of that, a lot of development is happening and all that thing.
So
But
as an issue of pride, let's say,
yes, so
of
they were
others.
happy with that, but along with that, they were also sad because for us, it's a place where we visit for like heritage walks and like see the structures and all. But for them, since it's a living city, it's their house, like it's a residential area. So due to commercialization of certain areas, due to increased commercialization of certain areas, there were a lot of hidden problems which come hand in hand. So while I was interviewing a community, living beside a very famous bed and breakfast, and it's a cluster sort of. So there they faced like a lot of issues which they were not, like they tried to, like ask for help from the governing bodies, but they were not given help or provided help. So that was because of the commercialization, because there was no owner as such. And during lockdowns, all these commercial properties were closed down. So because of lack of ownership and lack of rules and regulations, there were issues which the community living there faced, and they were very sad. They were like, people no polls because of the community, like the social cohesion factor, which is very prominent in these polls.
Would you like to
But
share some experience more
yeah,
specific on that?
so if I want to specifically say, so this was when even I like I had to visit, I had to do field work. So when I have to visit them like frequently. So once I was visiting them, and even I saw this. So there were youth, okay, from other poles who would gather around the commercial property, and they would create nuisance for the residents over there. So they would be smoking, they would do drugs and all, and which is illegal, by the way. So they tried to ask help from police and all those things, but it was of no use, because they would again come back. And also that was because, so I asked them, why don't you like just shoo them off? So they are like, it's not our area, they are not sitting in front of my house, they are sitting in the social space, because it's a commercial property and there is no owner over there. So we cannot just go and tell them. They'll be like, we are not sitting in your place or
It was a more
near.
public space.
Yes. So polls have the major criteria, like Ahmedabad World Heritage City got its OUV, it's the 5th criteria. So that is the social spaces which are there in the neighborhoods of polls. So that is the OUV. Okay. Now the OUV itself is
Outstanding
like
universal value.
yes.
Just yeah.
So now the OUV itself is getting, I would say, getting dilapidated because of some this sort of activities. So that is because there is no accountability, earlier. And there was another poll which I like, there was another house, the same, like not a same model but a similar model was followed over there. But because the family was also living within the commercial property, they were responsible for the upkeep of the laws and regulations over there. So the residents which were living beside that property, the second property, they were happy. They were happy, even they were helpful to the family itself. They would gather around, treat the visitors as guests of the pole, and they would, participate in social gatherings alongside the guests, and they would treat them as family members. So I could see stark differences. If there is good regulation, accountability, the community is happy with the development and commercialization and everything. But if not, then they are also, they were thinking that, now we have girls and we are not we are not yeah.
I think this topic is very interesting that you mentioned, because we again, heritage professionals internationally would see a local community as a unified body. But this is not the case. So depending on the geographical location, depending on the responsibilities, social or even legal responsibilities, they might have very different connections with the site, with the other community and stakeholder groups. That's a very interesting point. Harsh, getting back to you. So you conducted your research in connection to the city, in connection to the community. How did this community, this local community, view your research? When you went and talked to the community members, how did they approach, how did they receive your research topic? I mean, did they find interesting or not interesting? Did they find that it was, let's say, part of themselves that they would like to share with you? Or, I mean, who are you that as an external researcher or scientist, etc., that they would, bother about sharing their opinions? And how did this approach of the community affect your own opinion, your own research on that?
Well,
as you see, we're focusing mostly on this connection between research and communities in historical places.
Well, the field work was very much interesting, and as the topic was based on the School of Architecture's history and heritage, people loved to talk. I mean, they were engaged, talking a lot towards its history and heritage.
So they were members of the university life.
Yeah.
And so, mostly students, to put it like that?
No. So there were 5 different groups whom I interviewed, and The first one was where from the early 60s, who were who were there associated with the school since its inception. Then there was a community of the current students. There were architects who had graduated from the School of Architecture, but now they are no longer associated with the school. And there are professionals who have not studied from the School of Architecture, but now they are teaching either or working as a professional at the School of Architecture.
As faculty.
So yeah, as faculties, yeah. So there are 4 different groups with whom I interacted, and everybody somehow or the other had some connection with the School of Architecture. So it was very interesting to get some insider formats, which in the form of their stories, their memories, and which could support. So actually, the background I would like to give about my research is coming from the value-based approach. So yeah, so as soon as we talk about architecture, connecting it to the value-based approach, it always flicks the mind that it's an aesthetic value-based approach. So
just about values inscribed by diverse groups of stakeholders in historical places and specifically in universities. Of Ahmedabad.
So while researching and looking at the literatures more and more, I found there was so little. I mean, the aesthetic value was just one point, and one needs to find out more and more, because there was a lot of more value-based approaches which were, hidden behind, which could support the future conservation approaches, future indigenous communities looking at the buildings. So there was a lot more, and suddenly, while looking at the literatures, while talking to the people, there were a lot of other socio-cultural values. There were layers. There was community building. There was a lot of other factors which came along with their stories. So I think that was very interesting. And as architecture students, we always used to conceptualize any particular design. So that concept was very much rooted and incepted while B.V. Doshi, who designed the school, and while designing the school, he had a particular kind of a value-based approach. For example, he approached the design of a school like he wanted a school which had no doors. So that was the idea behind, and that's how the values of simplicity, the values of design, the values of architecture, we have been inserted. And I think along with the modern architectural language, which changed the entire scenario of the architecture towards, of the people living in the city towards architecture, and I think pan-India. So I think that's how.
That's very interesting, because sometimes through values-based approach, we tend to focus on this aesthetic, etc. But this beyond this aesthetic towards social, or as buildings serving the community of students, the community of professors, etc. That's very, very interesting. Vasudha, what were your experiences about the community, local community opinions about your research, and how was this interaction as a researcher with these community members?
So initially, I don't think I was really new to the community, because they were like, okay, we have one more student coming from another university talking to us. So I think my first impression was that they're very well acquainted with this process. They're very well acquainted with this entire procedure or this process of, we outsiders and students coming into their area and talking to them and wanting to know them. So this is a very normal process for them. And the other part was that they were very well adept at introducing me to their area. They exactly knew how to present their area to me. So it was almost like they've done this a number of times. So this wasn't a new activity for them. And, that just tells me that probably how many, students or researchers do they, probably receive, that they exactly know that what is the image of their community or the area that they want to put
So
out.
they were prepared for
Yes.
the research questions.
Yes, they were very prepared.
They had a
And
script. Yes.
almost. Yeah, almost. So it took a while to actually break through that and understand that what do you really feel. So to understand that, I don't want to hear an answer from you just because it'll look good for me. I want to hear what do you feel. So that was a bit of a tricky situation. Of
But
course,
how did you, breach this? How did you break this, let's say, this approach towards their true feelings and not just, responding to a scientific kind of survey or research? How did you break through?
so I had picked up the same area for multiple courses before taking it up again for the thesis. So during different courses and modules, I had been there earlier and I'd be talking to different stakeholders. So not only was I talking to the community that stayed there, but I was also talking to probably the entrepreneur who was working there, and I was working to an outsider who was employed in that community. And because through different modules, I'd asked them different questions and I got a different point of view. Towards the end, even though I did have some pre-rehearsed answers, you were able to kind of put them in different parameters and perspective and get a certain sentiment, which, like I previously mentioned, was an impetus for me to actually understand that maybe my thesis is in the right direction. It is good to blend development and heritage. It's not a bad idea because the people living there want it. They're not very vocal about it, or maybe because of the power imbalance, they are not able to be vocal about it. But there is a need. So also, it's very easy for me to understand that when we stay in the modern areas, we want amenities. So the people who are actually living in the historic areas, even they want amenities. For us, it's a historic area. For us, it's heritage. For them, it's normal.
So it was kind of a training process for the participants of the research, for the members of the local community, but also for you.
Absolutely.
That's very interesting. Niyati?
So I would like to just clarify here that mine and Vasudha's thesis is kind of overlapping each other because we have like a common fieldwork area, common poles we selected. So yeah, I would just add on Vasudha only that it was a similar case, and I would just share that for the first time I visited the pole, and I was just clicking few pictures because we also have to put pictures in thesis. So one lady just came to me and she was like, when is this work going to be completed? I'm like, which work? They're like, at the time the renovation of the pole was ongoing. So they're like, you're not with the heritage team? I'm like, no. So since I was clicking pictures of the structures, she assumed that I am with the heritage team and all.
So they would see that as a kind of threat.
Yeah, not threat, but I just want to share that people there are well aware. They are because a lot of students, researchers and professionals and everyone have been there asking them, and also they have like a very good prepared set of answers. If anyone from you'll go the first answers or the first time you visit, and they'll be giving you very good and a very romanticized scenario of the pole, you'll love it. Okay, but if you are not aware that this is their daily thing, okay, a lot of people go there and they are aware, so they'll ask you, okay, you want this answer in that way. So
you
it's
see
about
sometimes how science or scientists in fact change, or how could I say, stage. It's a kind of staging answers, staging connections, and then depending on the questions, they get the answers they want.
Yes.
So we as researchers tend to validate, confirm, further establish our own opinions, norms, and we call them mental models. And then we forget about the community members, that we go on with our own mental models. That's a nice way to not go for that. Yes, sorry.
Yeah. So I had this advantage because I consider myself also a stakeholder and not as someone who is outside the old city. because I've also been there. I've also, like had these sort of issues. We also had these sort of issues. So I just tried to, talk to them as someone who is also from the old city. And then after few visits, they started to open up, because these were sensitive issues. They cannot trust anyone and everyone, because they were like skeptic about sharing their problems.
Name a couple of these sensitive
Yeah,
issues.
so because they, like I earlier mentioned, the issues they were facing, right? So they were scared that, I might be someone who could, they don't want like, fights amongst the neighbors, right? So they thought that maybe I would be someone who is from the, the commercial settlement people and all. So they restricted me that, do not use our names in your thesis and all, because I clarified them that, I'm doing this thesis, and this is what I, and they were really happy. They were happy that, okay, someone is talking about us also, because all these commercialization and all these development is affecting us, because people, they sell their homes and they go, so their connect is lost over there, but we stay here, and we have to face this every day. So she was just like telling me day to day problems they face, like, say for example, so these commercial properties, they give their properties for shooting and all. So she was telling me that, once one day they were shooting, and my daughter had to go to tuition, and they told me that, take some other route. We have done the setup, so you cannot go from here. So she was like, "Ki, you do your shooting. We are not disrupting you or all, but don't disrupt our lives also. No, you have to have that, what do we call it, humanity or something, that, we live here, we have our daily lives over here. How can?" So she got late. Her daughter got late. So she was like, "These are just few issues, but these have been happening to us since like a lot of time." So they're just fed up with all these things. They're like, "This is a residential area. If you are shooting us, you are coming in our area, and you're not allowing us to, like move freely around it." So these were some of the issues they, opened up after a lot of, interviews.
Based on this, I would like to ask, I mean, okay, about the past, the connection, etc., but what about the present and especially the future? How would this community that shared their problems, beyond this formalized discussion, etc., they shared their problems, even if they would not like their names to be mentioned. But when it comes to what we call internationally sustainable development, how would this community think about this sustainable development? How would they think about the present, but especially the future of their place? And I would like to ask, either in connection to that or challenging the local community's views, how would you see the present and the future, the sustainable development of this place, of Ahmedabad, World Heritage City? So what would be the two views, their views, and you, mostly as a researcher, on the present, the future of Ahmedabad, World Heritage City? Niyati, would you like to start, since you're closer to me?
Yes.
And it's a difficult question, so that I can manage you in a better way.
Okay. So how does the community look at the, I'll start with that. So, they just want basic things. It's not that complicated for them. We try to sometimes complicate a simple thing. They just want rules and regulations. So while I was researching all these things, I have been to the history and all of the polls and everything. So while I was just talking to them, I was asking them, then how can we bring a common ground to this problem? So one old man, he told that, in our days we would have punch, and that punch was responsible for the upkeep of the pole. If we would have something on the similar lines today, then majority of the problems would be solved. So that was again how I could come up with the conclusion to my thesis. From the community itself, they, when you interact with them, you ask them, then how can it be done? So that's why community participation is important in decision making, in policy making for any World Heritage Site or I would say any heritage structure, because we always, academician and professionals always tend to say this, that heritage is for the people, it's of the people. So it's within the people also. They also know, they also want to, someone who has grown up in the pole, who would want his grandson also to know what is the pole culture, how beautiful it is, and the social cohesion factor. But because of certain external factors, if his or her grandson wouldn't be able to do that, even they would be sad. So they just want basic facilities. So that's how. So it was always the people would govern the polls. It was someone amongst them. Like, just we have secretaries for apartments and societies. They just want the same thing. Someone who is accountable for the upkeep of the poll, be it cleaning, be it facilities, and be it law and regulation. That's what their basic demand is. As a professional, I would say that
So living needs, I mean,
yes, because
and themselves playing a role in this
yes.
decision, in this vision, implementation of the vision in the future. This is very important. Yeah.
Yeah. So as a heritage professional, if I think of sustainable development, so we a lot, like, there are a lot of people talking about development and commercialization in polls and everything. I agree, I totally agree that commercialization is important. Revenue and economic benefits and all those things from heritage is important, because just an abundant structure standing there serves no use. But it's just that we should keep the value associated with the World Heritage Site, since we are talking of the World Heritage Site. So the value associated with it, here we are talking about the social value, the social cohesion, the social factor. The community say that Poles have their own culture, that culture we are talking. So in providing development and commercialization to these structures, we are in a way forgetting this social value, this social factor, which is again the OUV, like I mentioned earlier also. So just keeping not just not just keeping it rhetoric, but actually in practice, when we talk about social value, it's just there, it's just there, but we should like bring it in practical, in use.
Sometimes
So
we tend to forget the people
yes.
themselves. Yes.
Yeah. So that was why I chose this topic, and specifically the title, that rehabilitation process. That's the commercialization. That's the development we are talking about. But how we can safeguard the social value through community participation.
Perfect. Vasudha, how did you experience in your research their views on the present, the future, and how similar or different your own views would be on that?
So I'm not going to elaborate on the community's views, because I think Niyati covered that.
Yeah.
They want a basic standard of living. They want amenities like we all want. As a heritage professional, I think I realized that we've attributed certain value systems to their area. So as a heritage professional, I feel I want to preserve that. I want to maintain that. I want to be able to contribute and, let those attributes be associated with that space. As a business economics professional, I realized that, we need to bring in some form of revenue generating mechanism. You need to be able to look beyond this value attribution and really see that how are we actually coming together to help them see a future that exists 15 years from today. It's not about the immediate 5 years. Everyone is, can account for that. What we are trying to do is make a future for them that exists 15 years from today.
Because, even my experience, allow me to say from similar projects, is that the local community would be the best, the most appropriate persons to talk about the problems, etc. But in many cases, they lack the vision. They lack the strategic vision. And I think what you say is that as heritage professionals, to help them, not to impose, because it would be very, how could I say, it would be easy, but not sustainable in the long term to impose our own vision to them. It's to help them come up with a strategic vision. And of course, every strategic vision has this element of economic development, in it. You cannot have, I mean, in today's world, a strategic vision, especially in such historical places, without the economic. But you need to introduce that in a certain way to the community rather than imposing it. Very interesting. Harsh? And then we can open it to questions, etc. Feel free to interrupt, intervene. As you see, I'm doing that for 1 hour right now. So feel free to do the same. Yes, Harsh?
So I have two thoughts on this this question. So the first one is the futuristic development. So if you look at the futuristic development, it always involves a vision of more than 50, 100 years, right? For example, 100, 200 years before, there were no local trains in Mumbai, right? But today it's one of the lifelines, right? So the development happens looking at a longer vision. But when we add a term sustainability to this aspect, it is always a people-centric approach, a community-centric approach, and we involve the community thoughts, their value-based approaches, their culturally sensitive roots, which are incepted throughout. So I think.
May I interrupt? You mentioned just before about 4 different community groups.
Yeah.
Could you identify, it's a difficult question,
Yeah.
some differences between these 4 community groups when it comes to sustainable development? For example, you talked about current students, you talked about students who have aged students who have graduated and left the university, etc. You talked about current faculty. Are there different views in this, in their approach towards sustainable development?
Unfortunately, not much was seen, because I was even to my utter surprise, I was interviewing all the 4 different age groups even. So when I was talking to a gentleman who was associated with the School of Architecture in 1960, so he might be into his 70s right now, but he had the same kind of feeling which the current students were feeling. So the common sensibility which I mapped was the sense of freedom, which was mapped by all the communities, and it was, for example, I would just exemplify this word. That gentleman who was associated with the school in 1960s exemplify that I used to, even graduating after my graduation, even I used to visit my school, and there was no guard who was confronting me to keep my IDs together. It was an open campus. It was an open learning ideology. But today, people ask me, where are you from? They ask for my IDs. So that sense of freedom was lost. Again, when I had a yeah, so when I had a word with the current students, they pointed out that there are several changes now happening in the campus. So things look very structured. They exemplified one of the girl. She was the daughter of one of the architects in Ahmedabad, and she used to relish the old canteen at the campus, even with her father, and she recalled that old memories. And now she is connecting that memories to the current canteen area, which is a double-heighted, different kind of a structure where they have multiple spaces, multiple functions functioning together. And now she pointed out a very important point, that the canteen today seems very structured, very peculiar in a manner. So which was not a case before. People used to roam around, people used to sit very freely, evidently, and that sense of freedom was seen. So in fact, everybody, I think all the 4 groups were in favor of the development. Everybody, I think all the groups were towards that. The progress which the school has made, it's wonderful, but that sense of freedom, that culturally narrative approaches have lost its roots. So I think that was something which was concluded in my thesis, and was very interesting point. So yeah.
Possibly our education the last decades, internationally speaking, I mean, moves into a very structured way. So this would be, let's say, reflected on the space itself. This is a very valid, a very interesting moment. So that was more or less on our part. Some questions. It was a very interesting discussion. Some questions on your part, or please, for those friends who are and colleagues who are watching us in an online, please open the space for questions. Yes.
Not really the question, but I would like to add.
Of course. I'm keeping that only for myself, as I said. Would you like to introduce
myself?
yourself, briefly introduce yourself, sir?
I'm Hiren Gandhi. I'm an architect planner, and I graduated from CEPT in 1977.
Mhm.
So I entered CEPT in 1970. So I fall in the same group, you know, the 60 ones which we are talking, and I'm also 68. Okay. And I teach, by the way, heritage at the LJ College in the master's program.
Uh-huh.
And since I saw this, I thought it would be interesting to go myself rather than, you know, attend the webinar. So I'll tell you one thing, you know, what you said, the canteen was the most interesting part for the students, because that is where the ideas generated. You know, in the studio, you have to be creative in terms of your ideas, right? And that is where the interactions between the students, between the faculties. In fact, I remember one of our faculty used to always treat us chai actually. So, I mean, you know, this was the kind of bonhomie which was there. And
so freedom even in the
very much,
interaction between
very
faculty
much,
and
yes,
students.
very much. And I stayed in the campus for almost 8 years because I did my architecture and then I did 2 years of planning. So, you know, and the other thing which I tell you is that the famous, I mean, the common saying in the 70s, you know, because we came from like I came from a Gujarati family, you know, and there were a couple of, we had only 30 people intake at that time, by the way, and from all over the country. Okay. So we had a real mix of people. Like I was from a very good Gujarati school, which was known as Sharda Mandir. And I was one of the toppers in the SSC board actually. And there were many people who were from CN and others. And there were people who were from you know, who had army background. Their parents were in army. They came from public schools. So it was a very interesting kind of a mix, you know. And I mean, initially, many people who were from the Gujarati medium, they kind of failed. But the toppers in the final year were all from the Gujarati medium. So they picked up, you know, in terms of the language. So what is important, what I'm trying to say, is that the kind of interaction between the people from various backgrounds, you know, and maybe for the people who are coming from Ahmedabad, girls smoking, you know, was a very shocking experience because there were people from the army background. Those girls were free, those students were free. They were smoking and all. So what he was telling is that rather than the space, which was a built space, because the whole space is an open space actually, the more the students loved, or I think the most the students loved, we also as students once upon a time,
Yes,
was the canteen area.
that's
You
important.
know,
Yes.
so
And
that's
that's
very interesting. And the second thing about this pole, because when I was young, my mama used to stay in one pole called Ramji Mandir Nipol, which was near Relief Road, you know. And their approach to their house, general approach to their house was through that Ramji Mandir temple. So it was so interesting. They used to enter, you know, whenever I still have the vivid memory that, you know, we used to go through the Ramji Mandir pole. And I mean, they of course moved later on after many years, but they always still remember their pole house, even though they are now staying in a flat. So what is interesting is that, but of course the pole also had its own problems in terms of lot of cattle, because cattle increased a lot, you know, and taking the vehicle was difficult up to their house. So, then the third thing is that when one of the councillors in Kadia area, he asked, Ashok Bhatt was a very famous councillor, he asked me to design, they wanted a substation to be put. So there was one bird feeding tower, and I designed a substation exactly matching that, you know. Torrent was initially very, very skeptical that we cannot have a substation of such a design. So
Exactly,
these things are very important for architects. And as you said, that you have to understand what is the sentiment of the people. If you understand the sentiment of the people who are staying there, I think you will be successful in terms of any kind of intervention that you do in their environment.
And how
Because like
difficult
all
it
these
is
people
to, you know,
said,
to
you
understand,
have to
and map.
understand what they feel. And the success of any project, any such type of intervention is only when people accept it. Because otherwise it will feather out, So I think, sorry, I've taken a little more
No,
time.
no, of course, it's an open discussion. Allow me to say that your point about, these different, let's say, students of different habits and the interaction between them. Even now, one could see that, the locals with the tourists, etc. There would be an interaction going on because it's an evolving, it's a dynamic place. So this interaction, I mean, one trains in a way. One community group trains in quotation marks.
But the unfortunate part now is most of the time people are into their mobiles. So
Yes.
really the interaction, one-to-one physical interaction, what we used to have, there's nothing. I mean, you are not distracted by anything.
You see, three of the four people we
obsessed
have
with
our
this.
mobiles here.
So for every 5 minutes, we want to look into it. So the
Yes.
interaction gets interrupted,
Exactly. So thank you. Some other questions? If there is a question, please let us know. Yes, please. Sir, could you take the mic? Could you bring the microphone? Please introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, I'm a first year student at CHM. My name is Rishikesh. My question is for Niyati and Harsh, for you both. In a general sense, both of your thesis topics were so centralized that you have to be there to understand when you are interacting with people who have lived in Pool, or whereas people who have went to SEPT. You have to talk to people who have been there. Otherwise, the other side of will not that much understand. But you also highlighted the point that you might get a similar kinds of answers again and again in certain sense, whereas you sense a very similar kind of a feeling in different kinds of work. But when it comes to the research points, how do you define there is a recurring notion that is going on, but out of which should we take for our own understanding to formulate our own arguments, and which should be left on the boundaries in certain sense. What I'm trying to say is, how do you differentiate the answers that you're getting, which are in a large quantity, will be same in general sense?
So how a researcher, in order to understand a bit better, how a researcher defines the research questions, you mean?
The data points that they are collected.
Okay, so you're talking about as a researcher. Okay, so firstly, I would like to say that earlier also I mentioned that when you go for the first time, people have a set of notion. They don't open up, right? It has to be a process. It's not a one-time event. You just go to the place, do your interview, and come back. That's not observation. You have to be a good observer. Okay, first thing is that, because a lot of things will come from the site itself. If you're visiting the site, be it any sort of research, any sort of community, if it's the first time, you'll not get answers. Second thing is sampling. You have to take a multiple perspective into consideration. So I had like a 18-year-old youth, and I also interviewed like a 75-year-old grandpa. So you have to take into consideration a lot of different perspectives. You have to you consciously choose, not just age wise. I had people, like I had the community stakeholders, I had the governing bodies representatives, I had interviewed practitioners and policymakers and entrepreneurs who were responsible for the business growth and everything. So diversifying the viewpoints, after that, when you analyze that data you have collected, it's a multiple process. It's not, you'll not get answers you wish, Okay, sometimes we also find answers we have never thought of. Like I never thought of, they would be facing this sort of problems. But when you go, you interact multiple times with them, then you'll find there is a repetitive pattern. That repetitive pattern itself is the significance that the answers they are giving is there's some truth in that. Because when we talk of something, someone would say something, someone would say something, but when there is a common thing in both the things, that is the truth you say, that is the similarity we talk of, that is the correct way you say, okay, we determine this is what they want. So that's where the data analysis come into role or consideration. So yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Firstly, my methodology was based on oral histories. So oral histories always involve a lot of stories. So definitely, while capturing those stories, you cannot have a structured interview to anybody, right? And I was talking to 5 different groups of people, having 5 different age groups, right? So you cannot ask the same question in a similar manner to an 18-year student, which you ask to a 65-year professional. So it has to be always a mix of questions. It's a pattern, as she mentioned. Definitely, it's a process, right? And you have to build a story while talking to them. You have to have a mix. Otherwise, if you have a structured question and answer session, it will be like a quantitative research. You have a coding, you are doing it, right? So either any of the qualitative processes, either you go to ethnography, any of field work you go. I think you have to build a process. You have to build a story. You have to find a way to interact with the community, right? You have to build a rapport. I hope you might have been aware till now what rapport building is all about, right? So all these fieldwork clues are very important while you talk to the community, and you have to be very smart enough while talking to the community, which kind of crowd you're talking to, right? And promptly within the stories you are covering your questions. So within the conversation you will get your answers. So you always have to build up a story, and I think those stories would cover a lot of memories. And I think my research was based on the value-based analysis from memory. So building up a lot of stories would help, to map those values. So yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. Some other question? Yes.
So what are some of the challenges involved during the fieldwork? So sometimes you get some answers like, you will do this research and you will just go away. Afterwards, what happened? That will not help. You will just write the paper for the great purpose. So like you get some sort of people. So how do you answer them, and what are the challenges involved during the fieldwork? And also, if you can elaborate on the pre-fieldwork process.
Is there somebody that you'd like to specifically address this question?
Anyone of them is fine.
So I think the first part of your question, that when we are really there in the field, so in terms of pre-field work, you can never be prepared enough. I mean, after going through the process, I realized I can't be prepared. No form of theory, teaching, thought process, research, it doesn't work. Because when you go there, the demographic is going to be different, right? And the moment your demographic profile changes, your entire approach has to change. So again, that was the first part that I learned personally, is that your research has to be a dynamic process. You cannot go in with a mindset. And also the questions evolve, because when you're talking to that person, they, the community is very smart to understand that we have an underlying interest. So in fact, we did have a community member who did pose this question that you're going to speak to me and you're going to make a thesis and you will graduate. And what about me? And I think the first approach that I took was that I was very honest and I was non-committal, that I'm not in a position right now to do something for you, right? But if you could help me with your answer, I may be in a position, say a year from now. So I think, I don't know if it was a good move or a bad move, but I was very honest with them. And I think it worked for me because they did open up to me. And you know, there is a sense of hope when they answer to you, because, you know, they'll end it up with the fact that I hope you can do something about it. So I think as a researcher, then it also puts a sense of responsibility in me that I hope I'm able to pull this through and, you know, bring it to an end where, you know, again, I might not be able to give them 100%, but maybe 20% for that effort and time they've put in. So again, pre-field work, you have to be very flexible mentally, and you have to be ready to kind of deal and dodge questions also, because the community is also very adept at asking you questions, which can be very tricky to answer. So yeah, you should know what to answer and what not to answer and how much to answer.
So Vasudha and Niyati, in your entire process of interviewing and whatever is the thesis, what was the most critical problem that you could gauge from whatever, the kind of group that you talked? Because ultimately everybody wants development, everybody wants to move forward, but they must have reflected something, right? That what is the most critical issue for them, and whether in terms of the age group, whether it varied, to a person who is say 18 years old and to a person who is 65-year-old, So what was the thing which was the most, when you say that, okay, are you happy with this development, or what is the problem that you are finding which is the most critical, So can you just tell what is the...
Okay, so the most critical thing I'm talking about here is that, they are skeptical. So while I was talking on the terms of what sort of problems you face due to development, that question itself was like, they were like, okay, someone is asking us this thing. Because when we talk about development, we take into consideration of the owners of the properties, of the policymakers, because they are the governing bodies, okay, of the tourists or the people who will be, using that space after the commercialization. But we never talk about the community who is living surrounding that commercial property. So they were happy that, someone is asking us, they are facing these issues, but people are not, maybe they are not able to speak up to this. So that was the critical point. They wanted to share this thing, but again they were skeptic that, I might be of some use, or maybe I would say something against them. So to give them a sense of security, I would say that, this is like a, I'll not take your names, you can just give your views, I just want your views. And later on she also told me that, I don't know if you'll help us out or not, but if at any point you can, just give my voice to the people who are concerned about the laws and upkeep of the polls and everything, just do that. I don't know if it will work or not, but I'll just hope that, this reaches out to the people who are um, in the like government and all. So while I was interviewing one of the local governing bodies who is responsible for the old city, even they didn't allow me to, disclose their identity, because they were like, I am giving my perspective, but do not take my name or anything. So while I was interviewing him, I also, because I considered this is my duty. Since I know the issue, I should post it somewhere. I should, share it with someone who can actually do something. So I just shared, after the interview, I just shared this thing that, while I was interviewing, I was doing my field work, I came across this issue, and, see if you could do something, on this matters. So I think, as a researcher, I sort of did my job over there, because I was not in a position where I could just, give them the solution. I am just a mediator who can just, facilitate their voices which are heard by the people who are in who can do something for them. So I think I did my job. Now I don't know, like I do care that, you know, if their answers are solved or not, but I think that was my job. I just
No,
correct me
so
if I'm wrong over
what
here.
I'm trying to understand is
Hmm.
that did somebody tell you, say, for example, that parking is really the issue
Yes.
or overcrowding is the issue, you know,
Hmm.
or when the development takes place, noise, dust, all these things are the issue. Did anybody say like this?
So
And even without development also, they do have a lot of other issues, you know.
hmm,
So
correct.
I'm just interested to know
Mhm.
whether they had the issue about the, let us say in terms of infrastructure, whether water supply, drainage, you know, street lighting, parking, all these things are the issues, you know, which they are facing every day. So did somebody say about this to you while you interviewed?
Yeah, so they did, you know, there are multiple issues we talk about here, but my thesis narrows down where I have to question them about the rehabilitation process, because that is the limitation of my thesis. I like we all have multiple issues, but we have to, because of the time restraints
Can
and
you tell me
everything.
what exactly you mean by rehabilitation?
Rehabilitation is adaptive reuse, as we all you know,
Okay.
use it in the normal terminology, but as a heritage professional, the technical term for adaptive reuse is rehabilitation. And
Okay.
even in the starting of my thesis, I have done a distinguish between, you know, the term rehabilitation and adaptive
They will
reuse.
be doing themselves or they'll be giving
No.
somebody else
So
to
because of
do it?
adaptive reuse happening in their area, there
Yes.
were, because say for example, you're living in a society, it's a residential property, there you just sell one of the bungalow to someone who will be doing some commercial activities over
Yes,
there.
yes.
You know, a lot of issues will be faced by the
Yes.
society people, right?
Yes.
So this, we have laws that, you know, in the residential area there should be no commercial activity in the urban city. But
Yes.
in the pole, being a heritage place,
No, like say a lot of houses are getting converted into
exactly
homestay.
exactly.
Let us say.
So
the
because of those
homestay has its own
homestays,
issues, you know.
yes, so that was my area of you know, research, where I was asking
If
them
somebody
questions.
converted his house into homestay, the neighbor was happy.
No, exactly.
So
That's
that's very
the
important.
neighbors. So I had two cases, one where the neighbors were happy, one where the neighbors were not happy. And that was my you know, research point, where, you know, I could come to a conclusion that why the neighbors were happy there and why they were not happy over there. So that's what I researched on.
Other question? Mhm. Do we have any other question? Okay, two final remarks on my part. First of all, based on your answer, Niyati, about asking, you know, community members who were being interviewed, asking about what could you do for them. In fact, talking realistically, you're all dealing and you're trying to make a change for these people. I mean, you're working in a foundation that gives, and you're responsible for giving some amazing heritage walks. And I'm saying amazing heritage walks because I have participated in one of your heritage walks. You give heritage walks for students, you give heritage walks for academics, for faculty, you give heritage walks for societies, for tourists. So through this and through your heritage walks, you give emphasis on the views of the people. So what this person asked you, that could you please make a change? Could you please um, um, convey my message, my voice to some other people who are interested? You're already doing that. Harsh, you're working in a architect, as an architect, and you're teaching. So you're focusing on community views, and of course, Ahmedabad city is a focal, a reference point for your work and for your teaching as well. So a lot of community views are there, and we are developing heritage and business consulting projects. And of course, our reference, one of our key reference areas is Ahmedabad and Gujarat in general. So you see that all of you, realistically speaking, you help to convey these views of these people. And at that point, you could not answer this question, but now you're already addressing this question in practice. And the last comment I would like to say is that we have three professionals, three colleagues. They're no longer students. One of design background, one of economic background, one of architecture background, and they all relate their backgrounds to heritage management, and they all work not only as designers, economists, and architecture, but also as heritage managers. This is on us. We would like to thank you very much. Those who joined in physical terms, those who joined in through this online platform, and we look forward to having you in the following hybrid seminars as well, with other series of topics beyond Ahmedabad and beyond communities and towards other scientific areas and either other geographical entities. Thank you very much.